are you doing or seeing a lot of contractors installing dual fuel systems?
Many of the homes are just a harvest system, but we've also deployed homes up in the mountains, up in Truckee, up in the Sierra Nevada.
Basically, you didn't see anything on the market, and so you guys basically kind of came up with your own concept for a heat pump.
Let's take those heat pumps and let's see if we can take them to the next level. Better, cheaper, cleaner, and more grid friendly. And that's what we were able to do.
What kind of climates are these actually being installed in right now? Tell me about the markets you currently serve.
We started on the West Coast, based in California. That's where we started. We now serve the whole of the West Coast as well as Colorado.
Or what does that installation look like in terms of how are you augmenting it or making it a little bit different across the different climates?
What we really focus on doing is making it modular.
Hello and welcome to the show. In today's episode, we're going to be interviewing a heat pump company founder who created a heat pump that not only heats your home, but also acts as a thermal storage battery backup. She's going to be talking about everything from how heat pumps actually impact the grid to which climates this particular heat pump and heat pumps in general. Please help me in welcoming to the show Jane Melia, co-founder of Harvest Heat Pump. Jane, welcome to the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Howard. Thank you for having me on your show. Really excited.
Likewise. Now, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, I mean, obviously, our channel, we talk a lot about basically HVAC for consumers and how they can get the best HVAC for their home. And so we feature a lot of products that are either new, or we talk about some of the products that are already out. And it seems like there's always products that are on the horizon, but not yet quite in the market, that are coming around the corner that are revolutionary. Your product is actually in market. It's already being installed, and it's truly a revolutionary product. But if we could just start with kind of your background story and how you founded Harvest, and tell me a little bit about how you went about starting a heat pump company.
Okay, let's go there. So I live in a creaky old house in the Bay Area with which had an aging gas furnace and water heater that really needed swapping out. I've been working in the energy space for a number of years. I and my husband were very aware that we wanted to go electric. We wanted to go for heat pumps. Why? Because heat pumps are just awesome, right? I think a lot of your audience already knows they're almost magic, right? They're moving heat rather than generating it. They're so much more efficient than even the best gas furnace. So that was the way we wanted to go. And that's really, where we started looking. And then the devil's in the details. We love heat pumps, but we're starting to see what would it mean for our house. We needed one heat pump for heating. And then, of course, you need a different heat pump for your water heating with the tank. Okay. But then what was going to happen? Those heat pumps, well, we need to heat our home at night and in the morning. So that's when we'll be running the heat pump, meaning it would be working when it's cold. And you probably know, and many of your audience know, heat pumps are less efficient when it's cold. So that drives up your bills. And then when you think about it, a lot of us are moving to heat pumps, which is the right thing to do. Heat pumps are awesome. But then we'll all start adding load to the grid, which at the end of the day is going to drive the need for costly capacity upgrades. And who's going to bear the cost? Us, the ratepayers.
Exactly.
Then finally, I worked in solar for a number of years, and I was really jazzed at the idea of using clean solar electricity. But if I'm running my heat pump at 5 a.m., it's not going to be using solar electrons. There are no solar electrons at 5 a.m. on the grid. So that when we thought, well, okay, we love heat pumps, but there's got to be a better way to do this. And we figured, that tank that we need anyway, let's figure out how we can turn that into a heat battery, essentially. Store up that heat and use it for later. Basically decoupling the time when you run the heat pump from the time when you deliver it. And the concept was super intuitive. We worked really hard, and a lot of the credit for this goes to my co-founder, Pierre Delforge, who's the real impetus behind this. But figuring out how can we run the heat pump, store that heat in the thermal battery, and then deliver it later for all your heating and hot water. And we worked on it. We tried it, got it running in my home, and we were so excited. My bills went down by 40% compared to gas. And it was meeting all our heating and hot water needs. So we thought, yes, this really works. We want to expand this and bring it to market and let other people take advantage of it.
Right on. That's awesome. And so you didn't see anything on the market. And so you guys basically kind of came up with your own concept for a heat pump, and that's kind of how it was founded. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It's only when you dig into it, you understand what's on the market and what's not there. And so it's just a question of saying, let's take those heat pumps and let's see if we can take them to the next level. Better, cheaper, cleaner, and more grid friendly. And And that's what we were able to do.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that. And you've actually touched on something that it's funny because we'll get a lot of, critiques in the comments. And sometimes people will say things, on both sides where we'll get heat pumps don't work in cold climates or heat pumps don't, they're not good for the grid. The grid can't handle it. And other people will say, oh, the grid can absolutely handle it. And, but you're actually saying that kind of something similar where that if everyone went heat pump kind of across the board, we would increase the load on the grid and that would, that the grid might not be able to handle it or put a strain on that. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So in most places, the peak load has traditionally been the afternoon in summer, right? When
Mhm.
everybody switches on the AC at the same time. But increasingly, what people are putting in heat pumps in their homes, which is great. But what we're increasingly seeing is that a growing number of grids are starting to see their peak energy load being mornings in winter. As more and more heat pumps are deployed, that's a trend which is continuing. So in some places it's happening now, some places it might happen in 2 or 5 years, some places it's going to happen in 10 years. But that's a growing trend. But it's only a growing trend if all the heat pumps act or switch on instantaneously. If you can combine that with load shifting, with storage, that problem need not happen. And so what we're saying is, yes, we can deploy heat pumps and we can avoid that problem by saying, let's take a tank and add some controls and make it into a thermal battery so you don't have that issue. And that's really what Harvest enables us to do. And I think, there's going to be a whole generation of new systems coming out there that avoid that problem. So it's kind of something scary that we're worried about, but it need not happen as long as you do it with thermal storage.
Tell me a little bit about how the system actually works. We've made a number of videos on our channel, so for people
Yeah.
watching who have already seen that, just to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because you're the founder. I was just talking about your product enthusiastically because I truly do think it's
Yeah.
very revolutionary in terms of creating a heat pump. Number one, that there's a refrigerant phase out going on right now, and so it brings up a lot of annoying feelings for people that are annoyed with phase outs and continuous planned obsolescence and yeah, it might be in the name of efficiency. I think it might be more in the name of, making money, but or maybe a combination of both. And that's okay. I mean, it's, we're a capitalist country. It is what it is. But when you have a product that uses because this specifically works with Sonco 2 is the heat pump that you chose. And that is a CO2 heat pump, right? In terms of the refrigerant that it uses. And then explain kind of the integration with the harvest. It's a brain or the harvest pod. Explain how that kind
Yeah.
of all communicates.
Yeah. So essentially, what Harvest builds is a control unit called the Harvest Pod. It's about the size of a large shoebox. It fits above a tank in a tank closet or beside it in the corner of the garage. That is the brains. It's also the heart of the system. And what the pod is doing is, first of all, predictive demand, right? How much heat will Howard's household need in the next 24 hours? Based on your typical behavior, but also based on the weather forecast. We're looking ahead. How cold is it going to be outside or how warm? And we're figuring out how much heat you need. So that's the brains part. And then it's saying, okay, so given that you need this much heat, when should we run the Sanco 2, which is as you say, the heat pump that we're using? When should we run that so that we maximize its efficiency and most of all, minimize your bills? And so
Yeah.
we generate that right amount of heat. And then we store that in the tank that we are really managing as a thermal battery. And that's where the pod has a role to play, which is continuously monitoring how much heat is in the tank, how much is being used, what temperature is it coming out at, are you running low or not? So it's able to top it up or not, depending on your need. And then your heating is delivered, using a standard system. It can be a forced air system. It can be a radiant floor. We basically don't mess with your house, right?
Yeah.
So no disruption on the inside of your house. If you've got ducts, we use them. If you've got radiant floor, we use them. But basically it is just that ability. What that pod is doing is saying, I know how much heat you need. I know when I should run the heat pump to do that. But I'm going to make sure I can minimize your bills by running the heat pump when it's most efficient and when you're if you've got a time of rate schedule when your rates are lowest.
And so basically the battery, essentially, to call it a battery, because that's kind of what it's storing heat instead of storing electricity is the concept.
Yeah.
Correct. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
and tell people a little bit about why you chose that versus just kind of like incorporating a power wall into the mix or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean there are a number of reasons. Fundamentally, we're using a tank of hot water as a battery, and If you load that up twice during the day, which is what we do in winter, it's got a similar capacity to a Tesla Powerwall in terms of the energy that we can shift. But it's a tank of hot water. It's cheaper. It's safe. It's durable. It never degrades over time. So I absolutely love lithium-ion batteries. They're great, but they're great for electric loads. They have challenges in terms of cost, in terms of rare minerals, in terms of durability. They degrade over time. So use those for your electric loads. But for anything that's thermal load, use a thermal battery. It's the cheapest, most durable, and safest thing in your house. So that's what we recommend. So there's a place for both, but for heating and hot water, thermal loads are the way to go.
Yeah, and there because anytime you're switching or converting electricity to heat, there's some efficiency loss too
Yeah,
there. And so just having because you're basically tying this into a hydronics air handler coil, correct? That
correct.
sits on
Yeah.
top of the furnace or air handler if it's a dual fuel. And are you doing or seeing a lot of contractors installing dual fuel systems, or are these mostly straight heat pump systems because of what kind of climates are these actually being installed in right now? Tell me about the markets you currently serve.
Yeah. So we started on the West Coast. I'm based in California. That's where we started. We now serve the whole of the West Coast as well as
Okay,
Colorado.
cool.
And to your point, many of the homes, it's just just a harvest system. But we've also deployed homes up in the mountains, up in Truckee, up in the Sierra Nevada. We deployed a couple of homes up in Edmonton, Alberta. Those homes are dual fuel homes. They had a gas furnace, they're able to keep it. And that's what the harvest brain is all about, right? It's going to sequence and figure out which is the optimum system to use. And so, 95% of the time it will be using just the harvest system. But on those really cold days, 0 degree days or sub, it's going to say, wait a minute, heat pumps are less efficient. We're going to use the gas furnace. But most of the homes don't need that. But if you're in a really cold climate, that's the modularity of harvest allows us to work intelligently with the gas furnace and switch to the gas furnace when we need it.
That's kind of one thing that's nice about this particular product is that the harvest, because it's kind of separate, this is plumbed in hydronically with all these
Yeah,
components, right? And so it's in a way, once you install the harvest, you're kind of are you future proofing for like new technologies that let's say when you replace your HVAC in 20 years, because you really only do it every 20 years. Most
yeah.
people only stay in their home 7 years. So when people are planning, 20 years from now, I always kind of smile a little bit, but some people do stay there, and so but in theory, it's kind of creating an infrastructure for the home that is staying, or is going to make it so that it's future proofed. Is that correct? To where,
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, in terms of infrastructure for the home, we try and be as least disruptive as possible. Let's imagine
sure,
you've got a gas furnace and you've got ducts. We're going to put an air handler, a hydronic air handler, where your gas furnace is and connect to those same ducts. And maybe the ducts might need sealing or we may need to add a different run, but mostly we're going to keep that infrastructure. We're not going to be adding refrigerant lines in your house, no mini splits in the house. It
just
just uses
water,
your central, just,
just water or
well,
hydronic
yeah,
lines.
a
Yeah,
hydronic line going to your air handler, and then it's
yeah,
just duct work going to your house, and so it
correct.
doesn't
Yeah.
disrupt your home. Now, in terms, so that stays. In terms of future proofing, I think what's really important is that what we're seeing is a growing trend towards time of use rates.
Hmm.
They have it in some places, they don't have it in others. I actually was reading a report recently saying the top 10 utilities in the United States all offer time of use rates, and they're not yet dominant, but they're beginning to grow. Why? Because the grids are struggling at night and in the morning, right? And so they're trying to share the motivation to encourage people to not draw electricity at those times. So what that means is you're future proofing because time of use rates are growing. And what that means is if in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years time, you end up on a time of use rates, harvest is ready. We're going to always run that heat pump away from those peak times and always, avoid you drawing power at those times when it might be twice or even 3 times more expensive. So that's really important. So it's future proofing from a dollar and cents perspective.
Right on. And as far as how you reduce bills, so the main thesis behind, in terms of lowering bills, reducing the operating costs with this particular system, is that part that's a big component of how why it runs kind of off, at those what's it called, off peak hours,
Off peak, yeah, yeah,
basically on a time of use plan. Because I know, like in we're on core in Colorado, and
yeah,
some of our, like on our office, it's kind of weird. We're core and Excel, and Excel is gas, so there's no time of use for gas because it
yeah.
just goes through a pipe. But we don't really use it. And then for our electric for core, we basically, from 4 to 8 is the only time there's a demand charge, where they kind
Right.
of if you're doing a bunch of heavy load stuff during that time, they charge you for it. Is that kind of how the concept, that this charges in the middle of the day when rates are lowest, and when it's most efficient, so that way your bills load as well as heating the home more effectively?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we set up your system, we enter into the system what's the rate schedule that you're on, and we can update that, of course, as if that changes. And so the system knows to avoid between 4 and 8 p.m. for Howard's household, for example. Or
Yes.
and then it's going to plan the rest around that, take into account outdoor air temperature and so on. In a way, we save money in two ways. One way is by avoiding those peak or part peak times, right? You don't want to be running the heat pump at 8 p.m. if that's a more expensive time. So we can run it in the middle of the day, but still heat your home at 8 p.m. You still get your heating at 8 p.m. But the other way we really save money is because the system is more efficient, because we don't have to run the heat pump at 5 a.m. when it's going to be less efficient. We can run it at noon. Heat pumps have got extraordinary efficiencies, right? And you look at those spec sheets and they are amazing. And we absolutely love heat pumps. But if you have to run it, at 5 a.m., it's not going to be as efficient as if you can run it at noon. So about half the savings are gained because we're more efficient, and the other half because we're doing that dance around avoiding the time of use rates, but still delivering your heat, whenever needed. So even if you didn't have if you had a completely flat rate, we would save bills compared to a regular heat pump system. And we save
Sure.
even more if you have a variable rate.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's good to know. That's what, it's like I said, it's a very unique concept. That's why when I first heard about your product, I
Mhm.
was definitely interested in it. Because a lot of the stuff out there, doesn't necessarily do that. And I do understand the concept of thermal storage versus battery storage. And it's, electrochemical, like a battery, is definitely, like you said, there's degradation, there's a life cycle to the battery, there's disposal of the battery. There's a whole bunch of things that you don't have to worry about so much when you're just storing a tank of water. So it's really interesting. Now, as far as some of the downsides with the system, or some of the limitations as it stands currently, because I know, like I said, this is YouTube, so all the comment sections, sometimes it's a circus, and we'll get people saying, oh, that doesn't work in my climate, and they're in like northern, Canada or something, and it's, I would say, listen, if it's -50 out, yeah, it's, or you're, above the Arctic Circle, yeah, it's not gonna it's not gonna probably, or heat pump's not a good solution for you. But for 99% or 95% of homes, this can be a solution. What are the regions and climates where this particular heat pump in this setup really works well? I know you're targeting the West Coast right now, up into the mountains, like into the Sierra Nevadas, and so you do California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado. Those are the 4
Yeah.
states you currently have a footprint in. In general, for people watching, just that might be curious or want you to come to their markets, because I know we have gotten some inquiries for people that were interested out of state. What's the general climate that this kind of works best in, and is there a viability or to this product or solution in a super cold climate? Because you mentioned you installed some in Alberta, or places in Canada where it can be very cold. And so, what does that infrastructure, or what does that installation look like in terms
Yeah.
of how are you augmenting it or making it a little bit different across the different climates?
Yeah. So first of all, we've chosen the Senko 2 as our primary engine, and that is a cold climate heat pump. It has the same capacity down to 4 degrees Fahrenheit and continues to deliver below that. So it is a system which is well equipped for colder climates. We have, as I mentioned, primarily deployed on the West Coast, but including in some pretty cold climates up in the mountains. And what we really focus on doing is making it modular. In many places, you just work with the Senko 2. Maybe if you've got a bigger home, we can put 2 Senko 2s in series as well. That also works. Some people have 2 furnaces. There's no reason why not. So you can actually, it's very modular and very easy to stack it in that way. But let's say you're on a place which is marginal, and that might not be quite enough. You've got to look at what is your design load, and you've got to make sure you can meet that. Well, then if you're marginal, we might say there are multiple solutions. One is add a small electric resistance booster at the exit of the tank, just topping it up, not taking over, just topping it up so that you've got that peace of mind on the coldest days of the year. Or you've got a gas furnace which is still functional. Let's combine it. Add the harvest coil at the exit of the gas furnace. We will run the harvest system most of the time, then switch on the gas furnace as needed automatically. You don't have to worry about it. Or let's imagine you've got a heat pump delivering AC, and we're going to say we can use that as supplemental heat as well. So all those things have already been deployed and are working. In Edmonton, Alberta, in the Sierra, they've got gas backup. Other homes, larger homes, may have electric resistance backup, and others have nothing because they don't need it. That's it.
Cool.
But I guess that the TLDR is that this is deployable in most climates. You just got to be thoughtful about how you do it. Heat pumps are deployed everywhere. I saw a stat recently saying 60% of homes in Norway use air source heat pumps, which is, that and Canada's having a growing pull of heat pumps. So heat pumps are way better than they used to be. And yes, they're less efficient as cold, but they're way better than they used to be. And they still are, they've still got over 100% efficiency or COP. So they're still awesome, even when it's pretty cold. You just have to be thoughtful how you do it and make sure you plan accordingly. One advantage of harvest is because we can completely decouple heat pump operation from heat and hot water delivery. When it's colder, we don't necessarily have to run it at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. We're going to maximize that use in the middle of the day. And so we do gain efficiency in that way. So we have an advantage compared to a regular heat pump system.
Yeah, because you're going to be storing the tank itself. It creates a thermocline, correct? Where there's like a thermal break between like hot and cold water, and that can go up or down depending on the demands of the house, right? So it's a shift.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of
Yeah,
how it
right.
literally charges like a battery is a battery of hot water. And so if and the harvest system, it ties into Wi-Fi. So does it know weather forecasts like of what's coming up, or does it know loads on the house, or is it just in the moment temperature sensor?
Okay, there's a lot there. I'm going to start with the
Sure.
thermocline, then get to the weather if that's okay. So yes, this is what they call a stratified tank. What that means is, a lot of hot water tanks, they're multi-pass. They're basically they're homogenized, right? The whole tank is heated up, and then if you don't use it, it cools down. You have to reheat it again. What we're doing is saying using a stratified tank. Physics is our friend here. Hot water is lighter than cold water. It floats at the top and cold water stays at the bottom. What that means is in summer, harvest pod is only going to heat maybe a quarter of the tank because that's all you need for your hot water. In spring and fall, we may be heating a half or 2/3. And in winter, we may heat the whole thing twice. And we're going to vary how much we heat depending on the need of the household. And again, to your point, we are cloud connected, we are connected to the internet. We can take into account the weather forecast in your zip code to understand, is it going to be colder or warmer than it was the previous day, the previous week? So we can adapt the load so that ahead of you using it, we're going to know, wait a minute, Howard's household needs a bit more heat tomorrow than they did yesterday. We're going to make sure they have more. And then we're continuously monitoring what's going on. Let's imagine your kids. I don't know if you've got any kids, but let's imagine you have kids and they bring home the whole soccer team, they're all having showers. You're using way too much, way more water than we would typically expect. Harvest system is detecting you're using more water than typically. That heat pump is going on and topping it up before you know it, before you run out. That predictive demand and monitoring is really, really powerful there. One other thing I wanted to flag is that the Senko 2 heats water at 150 degrees. Typical, heat pumps are heating water at 120. What that means is the tank has got a good amount of energy density in it, a good amount of energy content in, which means that a tank that fits into most tank closets or the corner of most garages is going to be enough to shift your load by many hours and take advantage of that efficiency and take advantage of those low rates. Many homes, it's going to be 119 gallon, which is actually no bigger than a typical heat pump water heater with the compressor on top, because ours is just a tank. The compressor's outdoors. And so it fits into your tank closet. It fits into your garage. It's not huge, and yet it has enough heat to shift your load.
Right on. Now, shifting gears a little bit and just talking about one thing. You talked about boilers in terms of radiant, or you talked about hydronics, I should say, in terms of
Yeah.
radiant floors. But there is a new, or you're experimenting now with a product that can also replace radiant, baseboards,
Yeah.
correct? For like traditional boiler setups. Tell me a little bit about that and how that what it's looking like preliminary. I know you've officially installed a few of these, or you're just kind of experimenting with them, or how far along are you with these baseboards?
Yeah, this is very exciting, right? We started. You got to start. You got to walk before you run. We started
Sure.
doing
Yeah.
forced air. That's what many homes are in California, and that's just rocking and rolling. We're just deploying that. That's working really well. Hydronic coil-in air handler, forced air, get your heat. The next one that we bid off was radiant floors. That's working really well. We've got a nice heat exchanger between our system and the floor, and it managed that very well. I'd say about 10-15% of our homes have got radiant floors. We've
Oh
just
wow.
started doing our first baseboard deployment. And what we're seeing coming to the market is baseboard devices or radiator devices, even hydronic mini splits that are designed for heat pumps. That essentially have a fan in them designed for heat pumps. And we're deploying our first one there, and that is working very well. And so our next step is start to offer that more broadly to our customers, because we know that there are geographies. It's very interesting, right? Some geographies have got a lot of forced air. Some geographies have got more baseboards, more radiators. And we want to make sure that we can meet the needs of customers, whatever their type of heating is, whatever their type of home is. And so I'm really pleased that we're getting our first system in, and we'll be able to roll that out in the coming months.
Awesome. Now, where one thing I wanted to talk about that you already touched on earlier when talking to the grid, but you have, being that your background was in the energy sector. Now, were you specifically working in solar, or were you working in another sector, or what sector of energy were you in?
So I was in solar for a number of years. I was in concentrated solar. I worked in solar cells. I also worked in energy storage before co-founding Harvard. So I had a
Okay.
background in startups and in energy innovation, which is my passion, right? And
Hey,
so
it's what makes the world go round. I mean, it's people take it for granted that when they flip on a light switch, they don't know where that those electrons had to travel from. So I applaud you for
that's right.
making sure we're all able to cook and stay warm. And so you have a lot of knowledge on the grid and how it functions. Do you have experience working with utilities, I take it, and things like that?
Yes, yes. As part of those roles, we were talking regularly with utilities and understanding the challenges that they're facing. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to give people, because people who watch this channel tend to be, in my experience, naturally, like I'm naturally just very curious, all right, about of kind of how things work. I think our listeners would really find it fascinating, given your knowledge on the subject, if you wanted to dive into to the grid specifically and some of the issues as it relates to, because you talked about solar, right? And one thing that people don't realize a lot of times, like I'll get comments from people that say, there's plenty of solar or whatnot. But like in California at one point, they had to cut the grid tie from, like, there's times when there's so much solar production that they can't use it. They actually cut you from the grid because you're overproducing, correct?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey, right? We 20 years ago, solar was just nascent, and now solar has been so successful. It is the cheapest way of generating electricity. And it
Yeah.
also happens to be super clean. So it's a win-win for everybody. And more grids are deploying solar as a really good, cost-effective way to generate electricity. But we all know solar shines in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And so we have a glut of solar in the middle of the day. And if you're a grid operator, it's probably heartbreaking. You have to curtail it in the middle of the day sometimes because there's so much solar and people don't need it. And
Yeah, the
so,
loads are down, right? Like, I mean, that's the, like you said, if it's 3 or 4 in the afternoon and your solar is like peaking out, but it's your load is really kind of at its lowest. It doesn't start to peak until like 5, 6, 7, 8, right? When people are getting home.
yeah. And then what's happening then is 5, 6, 7, 8, the gas peaker plants have to ratchet up very fast, very expensive to do. And at the end of the day, we're bearing those costs to ratchet up to that need in the morning. And similarly, but to a less extent in the morning, they have peaker plants ratcheting up to meet the morning load. And in the middle of the day, they've got a lot of solar. That's why home electrification is kind of an interesting paradigm, right? It's a good thing to put clean electric heat pumps in homes, but if it actually makes it harder for the grid, it's a conundrum, right? Can we really solve this? And that's where combining heat pumps with thermal storage solves that paradigm. which says we can electrify homes. Yes, we can put these wonderful heat pumps in our homes. And you know what? We can still use that solar electricity in the middle of the day because we put in thermal storage. So we can run the heat pump in the middle of the day, use the excess solar so the grids don't have to curtail it anymore. And then there's less load in the evening, so they don't have to run so much those peaker plants. And so it's that win-win-win. It helps the grid, it helps the home, it reduces your bills. Super comfortable as well. So that's the exciting thing, which is, you had in a way this kind of almost this battle between, do we clean up the grid or do we clean up our homes? And we can do both.
Mhm.
And that's what Harvest helps us do.
That's awesome, and, yeah, no, I find it super interesting, and I was curious, like, when you're looking at because essentially when you're looking at people's motivations with
Yeah,
this type of product, do you find? Because I know in California, they've had issues with, rolling brownouts, rolling blackouts. I know
yeah,
in Texas, it's made news a couple times, like, they had some ice storms that knocked them out. That was a few years back, and things were down for a while.
yeah.
Hurricanes are different issues where, your power goes out. But in a lot of ways, storing some sort of, I mean, this probably explains why there's so many tax credits and things like that, is because they want you to put infrastructure in your
Yeah.
home to be energy independent. Are people approaching this when you are talking to them where that's like a big priority, is like being energy independent, where they know, hey, are people incorporating this also with a Tesla Powerwall or some sort of battery backup in addition to the solar backup, just so they can be off grid or completely independent because of the volatility of the grid, in the middle of summer and things like that, or winter, even.
I think there's a whole range of motivations. The grid is most volatile towards the end of the summer. That's when
Mm,
in California you get the fire season. That's when you get the
mhm.
blackouts and so
Yeah.
on. And what Harvest does is you can load that tank up, ahead of time, and you can have hot water for a week, right? So you load your tank up and you got plenty of hot water. So that's really nice. Being able to have hot showers in a power outage is really nice. So people love that resilience. And yes, we're not going to give you electric power, but we're going to give you that hot water, which is really really nice, which is important for quality of life in those blackouts. Other motivations that we're seeing is people. I'm actually sitting on an earthquake fault.
Mhm.
Having gas in your home is actually, gas is the fires, gas, sorry, during earthquakes, gas lines rupturing, causing fires is responsible for about 50% of the fires after an earthquake. So
Oh,
gas
wow.
lines are problematic in an earthquake. So a lot of people around here saying, you know what, I actually feel more peace of mind not having that gas furnace in my house. Or my kids got asthma and I really want good air quality. Heat pumps are just awesome. They are so clean. And they just
Mhm.
feel, well, I just want that cleaner air. I want to get rid of gas. And if at the same time I'm using clean solar electricity and I'm cutting my bills, that really helps. And then the icing on the cake is if I have a power outage, I know I've got plenty of hot water. That's just even better. So it's just some of the wins that help make the decision. But you
Awesome.
were touching on earlier, because the storage allows that grid resiliency. So it helps everybody, helps infrastructure for everybody, even people who don't have a harvest system. Our customers benefit from better rebates, better incentives, better tax credits, which really helps in the investment at the beginning.
So just for people that are in your markets or markets that you're serving right now, Washington, Oregon, California, and then as well as Colorado, there's a federal tax credit available for battery storage, and there's also a tax credit available for in each of these markets as well, correct? Do you want to dive into some of the rebates that are currently available to help, offset the installation cost of the equipment and kind of break those down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a complex map. And first of all,
I know.
Harvest team will help you out, right? Because it varies a lot depending on where you are and depending on what else, depending on your house type and what else you're doing to the house. But across the nation, there are federal tax credits. Particularly, there's something called Section 25D, which is an energy storage tax credit. And that's an important one because that allows a significant reduction for the upfront investment because of that load shifting capability. And then what we're finding is that there are a lot of either state or local, or even sometimes down to the city in terms of rebates. And that adds up. And what that means is together, a harvest system shouldn't cost more than a typical heat pump system, a mid-tier heat pump system. In some cases, it's going to be cheaper depending on the stack of incentives that you particularly can access. But what that means is it's going to be average or less than a regular heat pump system, but it's going to cut your bills month over month compared to that system. So it's good bang for your buck, right? It's a good payback in terms of that investment.
California in particular, they had a big rebate recently as well,
Yeah.
correct, on this? Yeah,
Yeah,
and is that
the
one still in
statewide,
effect?
yeah. So the statewide, there was a rebate called Tech, which is no longer in effect. It
Okay.
may, you know, who knows if that's going to come back? But there are other rebates available. So if you electrify your home and cut the gas, you can get a significant rebate. If you're in San Jose area, there's another rebate. If you're in San Francisco, there's another rebate. And LA, I mean, there is a mosaic of rebates.
Yeah,
And we're happy to help walk through, look at your zip code and figure out what you've got and try to help
perfect.
through that journey. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, on that note, Jane, thanks for coming on the show and being a guest. I'm sure people found this fascinating. I think it was very helpful. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about Harvest?
Go at harvestthermal.com and click on Get Harvest, and somebody will be happy to chat and tell you more about the system.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks for being a guest on the show. I'm sure people found this fascinating, and we'll make sure to link that in the description as well for people's convenience. And everyone who tuned in, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode.